Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and tonight I'm joined by this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted. How are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm doing well. Ready to talk about some D&D homebrew, and
Indeed.
you kind of brought up this topic in a roundabout way, and I kind of think
Sure.
I simplified it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my initial thought pattern was is like, since we've created so much content, not only here on the channel, but over on the website as well, that we might be able to showcase our thoughts on how we make, whether it be a monster or a magic item or what have you. But I mean, we've made spells and we've made subclasses, so like, was confident enough in our skills with 5e to be like, all right, we can make whatever we want at this point.
Yeah, I would say so in the game. We there isn't anything we haven't homebrewed yet. I guess I was thinking for more like broad terms, maybe like maybe some of the pros, the cons of homebrew, and when should a GM start using homebrew in their games? Is homebrew only for the GM? Can players use it too? I feel like there's a bunch of different like topics in there, including like what do we think is the easiest thing to homebrew, what is the hardest thing to homebrew, and what are the things that have the most pitfalls for homebrewing.
Yeah, I would agree with with that assessment of being able to stretch it out to creating more things or talking about more things I should say. Um, to easily get into it, the hardest thing to make would be a full on class. Uh, you know, and I think that's something that we haven't felt the desire to. Not only have we not made one, but it's like until we find something that isn't covered by other stuff and have a unique enough approach to it that we would be able to make at least three subclasses that it's not really necessary to make one.
I feel like there's a lot of party content creators out there that would disagree with you, but also too like part of it is like, are some people just making stuff to make it, right? Like, I would say, like, as far as character classes go, we could really still use a psionicist. So I'm kind of in favor of anybody that kind of comes up with some kind of psionics, because Wizards of the Coast hasn't really done much with it, or fully fleshed it out. There was some like attempts that kind of like stopped and stalled. And
And
also, Spawn of Lovecraft. We will definitely be discussing the cons of homebrew because there are many.
oh, absolutely. And yeah, I would say psionics is something that the game is lacking. Having friends and a love of my own that really enjoy psionics, um, but there's enough flavor that you can play around with it with wizard or fighter, or I think there's one for um, what's it for rogue that you can kind of play with.
Yeah, we have. Is it a psychic warrior? Or is it a psi warrior or psi knight?
Side warrior.
Psychic knight. I don't know. There's a couple of different iterations of the name, and I have a lot of additions for them. But also, you have the soul knife from the rogue, and then like there's an aberration kind of psychic version for the sorcerer as well.
So you've got some options, and they're not the psionicists that we know of from previous editions, but you can flavor it enough to have some fun with it, and you could even homebrew. Instead of it being a sorcerer class, or instead of it being a charisma class, you can make it be intelligence or wisdom, for that particular character, and treat it as more of a intellect based or wisdom based scenario, and have it be psionic as opposed to actual, um, you know, sorcerer or wizard or what have you.
So
But I
you
mean,
know you
that's just off the cuff.
you kind of threw out there that character class homebrew is the hardest, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be the most challenging. What do we think the easiest is?
Magic items. I feel those things can be incredibly easy to make something that doesn't even have to do an awful lot. If you want something that's just a tidbit of power, there's enough mechanics in the classes, other magic items, spells that emulate stuff that can happen in the game, and you're like, all right, I'm just going to drop this in a magic item so that they can have it.
That was my
And
initial thought as well. Now, I will say there's one problem. But when I'm thinking about it, I feel like there's one problem, right? And that's
sure,
why I am going to say monsters is a great place to start, because in theory, a monster sticks around for an encounter and
right,
then leaves one way or another, right?
sure,
Anything you introduce to the players could conceivably stick around for the campaign, or if say you give them something too good as a magic item, then you have to fix the problem as the GM, and that
right,
creates more problems sometimes.
right. But a overpowered monster could have lasting repercussions by like, oops, I didn't mean to kill that character,
Only for
and
one session.
sure, but you've done a TPK or you've killed half the party, because the monster's too powerful and they're rolling like crap and it's just walking all over them. Uh, you
Well,
know,
I guess
as
the reason why yes, I understand that logic, but
mhm,
my thoughts are, well, as the GM, you can always fudge the rolls, you can help them behind the screen, and also defeat doesn't have to mean death.
right. And depending upon what the monster is and depending upon how things go, a good DM always has the ability to adjust. And whether it be a magic item or a monster, you've always got the ability to say, all right, how do I want to handle this problem that I've put out there? But looking at it from that perspective, sure, I'll say most of the time, because it's an encounter, making the monster has the smallest impact on the game, but mechanically you've got a lot going on for what that monster could be versus replicating a thing that already exists in the game and just dropping that in there.
Yeah, I mean, so where do you go from there?
So looking at if we wanted to look at the example of making a monster, we've talked about on the channel a lot of times that we'll have multiple D&D Beyond tabs open, and we're like, all right, well, I'm going to use these stats and I'm going to take this ability from here and this ability from this other monster and I'm going to smush this all together to make one thing. I've had many times that I've done just that, but rather than jumping from tabs, I'll copy the abilities and put it all into like a Google Doc, and that'll be my monster. I might make some tweaks and
Uh,
adjust some things, beyond that. But for the most part, you can kind of cut, clip, and borrow from things that are out there, or take inspiration. One of my big things that I enjoy doing is altering the damage type of spells. And then when I describe it, it might not sound anything like the original spell. And like when I was at D&D in a castle and I used an acid ball or a poison ball or whatever it was that I used, and I talked about, this bead of energy that so many people have described a fireball being this thing that just zooms into a point and then explodes. Like the one player had never seen homebrew content before and he was just amazed. Like, yeah, I rolled 8 die 6 and it did acid or poison damage, but he'd never seen any of that before. And it was like, okay, well, I do this kind of stuff all the time. So like we had like 5 minutes of like the party talking about, homebrew and how things work. And it was a lot of fun to kind of introduce this player to this side of the game.
I will say, if you are, if you want to do homebrew monsters and you have access to D&D Beyond, like, oftentimes I'll just copy a monster that's close to what I want and tweak it.
Yep.
And if there are actual abilities that you want, you can open up another copy of that monster and just copy and paste the abilities. So like it'll do all the dice rolling and everything that you would normally do on D&D Beyond without you really have to do any of the heavy lifting.
But if you look at it's like, all right, well, these stats work and this ability works, it's very easy, to mush them together. The real trick is when you start coming up with alternate options, whether you're just adding things to that makes the encounter a little bit more challenging because the monster itself has different things that it couldn't do before that it now can. That's not to say that every time you add an option that makes the thing stronger, because it's not the case. It can still only do so many actions. But
You can
when
go
you
the other
start,
way too. You could be like, I really want to use this monster, but it punches well above where my players are right now, and you can downgrade it a little bit. Also, like even going along those veins, there's quite a few monsters that have been published in different 5e publications where it's some form of it's a lesser version,
sure,
and like
I was gonna mention the Wyvern has a reduced threat stat
yeah,
block.
yep, and there's several
So
monsters like that.
so if you just search for those kind of things, and see how it makes those changes, you can then be like, all right, well, I want to use a reduced threat purple worm. What does that look like? And I think there might be a juvenile purple worm that's in there, but like whatever it is that you want to reduce, you can
Yep.
kind of lock in and be like, all right, what does this look like if I make it weaker?
So, when do you think a GM should or could start homebrewing in their games?
It's really tough to make just a generic situation or generic call. Um, if you feel confident that you understand the mechanics, whether you've played a handful of games and then run a handful of games, um, when when you feel confident about your decision to give it a try, give it a try. Um, it's as Dave says, the worst thing that can happen is it's going to affect this session.
Yeah.
If you're making a monster, only you know what its thought patterns is, and well, yeah, it might be winning, but well, maybe this particular creature or person decides, well, I'm not willing to fight to the death, and I've just become bloodied, so I'm gonna run, I'm gonna flee. And I've had monsters do that kind of stuff, and I've had players run from combat because it's like, well, this is more than I think we can handle, so they're just gonna flee. So like you really have to be intelligent about it.
What is your favorite homebrew to play with?
I haven't done it in a while, but I really like playing with the mechanics of trolls. Trolls presents themselves as being susceptible to mutations within the 5e, lore base. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to have them essentially have a consistent diet of something, they can develop, some kind of new power, some kind of new resistance. Um, so I think it could be a lot of fun to be like, all right, well, I think I made like a displacer troll at one point in time. That was a lot of fun. That it looked like a troll, but it had the tentacles coming out of it and it had extra claws because they normally have 6 legs. So I'm like, well, it'll have 2 legs and 4 arms. And then you give a troll displacement, and that's just kind of mean.
It is very mean. Tentacles, extra arms, and displacement.
Uh huh.
You didn't use that against us, so I know I would remember
I
that
don't remember
monster.
who I used that on, but I made that. I'm like, when I first read the the trolls and their mutations. Obviously, I've made mention here many times. Displacer Beast is my favorite monster, so that was the my first kind of thought or go to. Uh, but like you go just as mean of like, all right, well, what if you've got a troll in a dungeon and it's been feeding on mimics?
Yeah.
What kind of nonsense could a troll that can shapeshift get up to?
So someone just asked, have you ever made an escape from a flooding cave-in scenario?
Don't think I've run that.
So so it wasn't a cave-in scenario, but I definitely had a water filling room trap that as soon as the water got like high enough, it started letting sharks in. And like I'm like, this is great. They'll have to figure it out. There's a pending doom because they could drown. And then like I went and made the encounter, and just before I ran it, I went and reread the rules on drowning. I was like, well, this is fucking worthless because you can hold your breath for like 20 rounds. What fight lasts that long? So
Yeah, but you know what? Like, I've seen GMs run things differently. So like, all right, well, if you get hit, you know, you have to make a Constitution saving throw to keep holding your breath.
yeah.
So like, everybody, as with all of these things, everybody does their own thing. So homebrew rules to make drowning a little bit more challenging, you know, can be one of those things that you play with.
Oh, pardon me. I probably would have ignored that question except for it definitely came up in a way, right?
Sure.
It's funny you mentioned the trolls because we just had like, last session I ran for with you guys had a bunch of trolls in there. Maybe it was a session before that.
Yeah, it was 2 sessions ago.
Yeah, it had a bunch of trolls in it, and they weren't going to be immune to acid at first. But one of you guys was like, "Don't use acid on it. This is the acid bogs. There's no way that'll work." I'm like, I like that suggestion. Noted. Done.
It made perfect sense. And like, if trolls are hanging around acid bogs, and acid's one of the things that shuts down regeneration normally for a troll, they want nothing to do with that place. That's my mentality. And you know, I threw that out there because let's face it, you know, my character's wearing the headband of intellect, so I kind of look at him as a genius. So I'm like, all right, well, that makes sense for him to throw that out there. Whether it's accurate or not, who knows? But turns out it wasn't at first.
Well, if I don't love anything, it is to love. It is loving to make you guys more accurate, especially if it makes your life harder in some way in the game.
Well, I mean, it's part of the player's job is to, you know, throw out those kind of things. And you know, let's face it, you know, even though my character's, you know, wearing that headband, I feel like sometimes he's not always making the best decisions. Um, you know, and I've kind of taken that as a nod from your play style of you know, having fun with the game. And since he's got a variety of cool items to play with, it's like, well, why not?
So let's run down some like pros and cons for homebrew real quick.
Absolutely.
So I guess we'll start with the cons, right? So obviously, when you introduce homebrew into your game, you don't automatically know how it's going to interact with all the other components of the game, right? Inevitably, you're going to have that one player that figures out every combination that you can possibly come up with using said ability, right? Whatever that is. One of our players at our table, Dr. Kurt, is really good at doing that kind of stuff. And really optimizers in general. So you just don't know when you're talking about subclasses, classes, racial features, feats, magic items, how any of that's going to interact in long term. So that stuff you have to be really careful with. And I would add the caveat: if you're introducing things that are set, like a new race, a new character class, a new subclass, new spells, new feats. Like I would add them to the game with the caveat of letting the player know, hey, we're going to test this as we play and see how it goes. And if it seems imbalanced one way or the other, we're going to have to either scale it up or down. Now, as the GM, I would highly suggest that you always side on the err on the side of caution and start off with something being a little weaker as opposed to too strong. Because if you start playtesting something and you like it and your player likes it, but it turns out during the game it's a little too weak. If you go to your player and like, oh, we need to beef this up a little bit, rarely I think you're going to find the player that's going to have a problem with that or be concerned with that decision. But if you go, hey, you know, this isn't
We need to
working.
tone this down.
Yeah, this is too strong. We need to tone it down. Then they might feel a certain way after they become accustomed to using it. So it's
Right.
always easier to scale up than it is down or back.
And we've seen that, with some of the stuff that, that we've got. Um, and to me, while yes, I like making effective characters, a lot of times I try to make things that are going to be fun. Other times, people make things. I was like, all right, I want to make the most effective, badass, looking, monster of a character that I can make. Um, and it's a scenario that it's like, when you get those kind of players, then it's like, all right, well, what are you looking at? What do we need to be aware of? Is there something that might need to be adjusted? And I agree with you, Dave, that if you always approach, whether it be any kind of homebrew, something you make or something that you've just gotten from D&D Beyond, DM needs to be able to say, look, I need to be able to possibly tone down, power up or take away if something becomes too disruptive or too powerful for a game.
Now, I would say that like that right there, like that's the biggest con to homebrew. I guess the other one is it's it adds complexity and more work for you as the GM. I would say they're the two main cons. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything else.
Well, I would say the fact that it requires work. Like you have to uh not only do you have to come up with what the thing is, but then there's everything that comes thereafter. You have to look at balance. Let me compare it to other items, other classes, other races of similar type to see whether it looks balanced, and then continually check throughout play. So it's extra work at all levels, unless you make it and it all just works.
So I would say for pros, like the biggest thing is like we play with a lot of players that are experienced and have been playing the game for a long time. So anytime you homebrew something, you show them something they haven't seen before. It, allows them to recapture some of the excitement of being a new player. And I think that's a huge benefit to homebrewing, and also too like and from the same thing from another angle is you played with players that have memorized the monster manual, right? They know all the monsters. Like, oh, it's a troll. We
Abs-
need fire and acid.
Absolutely. Yeah,
It,
it's so tough, having that feel of, with the with players of like you want discovery. You want the surprise. And while there's some people who know the monster manual. I haven't memorized it, but far from it. But like you put any of the standard monsters out there, and it's tough for me to not really think about, all right, what is this? What do I do here? So yeah, when we fought the trolls, my character who is all about fire, I'm like, hey, let me polymorph into something else that I wound up making the encounter more difficult on us
yeah.
because like I was the one that could have shut them all down. But I'm like, nope, I'm gonna be a manticore for this fight instead.
Um. Yeah. So I would say the other thing too is for homebrew is it creates a creative outlet for us as GMs and lets us make stuff and tinker with game design, right? Which I think like inherently, if you're a GM, that is one of the aspects you probably enjoy. Yeah, because there's a couple aspects that you get out of the game from being the GM that you don't get from being a player. Players generally don't get the world built as much as the GM. They mechanically don't get to make changes or design anything in the game. Um, and also they don't direct the story in the same way the GM does. So like it's like those three pillars. of GMing, kind of make that role special in the game. And I feel like, especially like in our group, we really like to tinker and make things new for the players so they can have that wonder. Or so when you have that one player that has memorized all the monsters and he's like, haha, I know what this is. This is a troll. I'm just going to use fire. And then you're like, haha, but my trolls heal from fire.
So the biggest pro for me of homebrew is, and I've said it many times, I love making magic items. And I, as a player and as a GM, I love custom made magic items that have been made especially for you. When the DM takes the time to acknowledge, all right, what is your character? All right, you are this type of warrior, this type of weapon, this is something that you've got as a goal. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to make this thing, and it's put in the game specifically for a particular character. That's awesome. You know, to me that means that out of game, the DM took some time to really think about, well, what is it that is this character, and what's going to best represent them. Um, and so I enjoy frequently coming up with it at least once a campaign, and anything that's like extended and drawn out. Like I will sit there and I'll custom make magic items for these characters, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of like coming up with what I think is something that player and character is going to really enjoy.
Yeah, and and really sometimes just really small tweaks can make a huge difference, right? Like some some of the things like I'm about to I designed a counter the other day I'm going to be using shortly. And I just did a small thing like I was looking at like magic items, magic weapons I wanted to use, and there's like a crystal sword. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I had already decided I was going to use a magic shield. So I was like, what if the shield is the same material as the sword, right? It game wise, it doesn't do anything different. It's just a +1 shield. But it alters the monster, right? Because it has these two items that it wouldn't normally have, making it slightly more powerful than it would be. Um, and players kind of like that when like they get something and it feels special, even though something like that, like the homebrew part of it is like almost non-existent or non-existent, you could say. But it's just like those little tweaks that the players tend to like in the game. And maybe introducing a crystal sword and a crystal shield will make them want to be like, well, where did they come from? Are there more crystal objects like this? Is there someone that just makes stuff out of crystal? You never know what kind of doors it's going to open in your game. And as a GM, it's a really special feeling when it's something that you came up with and like 100% homebrewed. Even monsters like had like your had that game going on where you're using displacer trolls. Like what makes a troll become that mutated? Yeah, I know it's in their genetics, but is that just it? Or as the players start delving deeper, do they find out that something else happened? They can be springboards for more adventures, more storytelling, and possibly even more homebrewing.
Yeah, and that's the catalyst. That's the thing that can really get you in there. And there are some DMs that they've been playing and creating their homebrew world for so long, and done exactly this, that they don't use any of the core magic items or monsters anymore, because everything that's their world has been so completely remade. um and that's where you get a campaign book, and you make something that becomes so much different from everything else that's out there.
Yeah, so a couple of the folks in the chat are discussing like items that level up as the character gets stronger, which we've definitely done that in our games. I actually like taking mundane objects that the players already possess and enchanting those as kind of like the first step. It's not
Yep.
even like it's not even them getting a new magic item. It's their item they already own getting magical. And I've also upgraded them over time, in other ways. Because inevitably you're gonna get that one player who's like, and this is my grandfather's longsword that was passed down to me, and he used it to fight in the Great War of the Ogres, and he used it to save my grandmother's life. I wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for this sword, right? And then like it's just a regular longsword, and he just wanted a cool story. And then like as soon as like a +1 mace comes along or something, he's like chucking his grandfather's sword for the magic item because that's just the way the game works.
Right. And that's kind of depressing, which is, why so often that we do that kind of stuff. Um, and in the Dawnbringers game that I was a part of on Mini Terrain Domain, Jeremy's character, my character's cousin, barbarian, he wielded a maul called Gerta, and it was just that. It was his grandfather's hammer. It had been passed down, blah 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 blah, and he had it with him for all this time. Well, as we got further into the game, my character, who was a smith and had access to a little bit of magic, I'm like, all right, well, I want to see if I can enchant it, and I had no idea what Jake was going to come up with. And I think we talked after the fact of like he was entirely going to just come up with whatever this was based off of whatever I did with the ritual. And I started like months before we wound up doing this process. I had started a journal in a Google Doc of different things that had been done, different characters that I was going to have be a part of this process, and we had had the goal at this point in time that we were going to go fight a Shardalon. So I wanted to make this weapon like especially effective against him. So this hammer had been used to smash a shrine of a Shardalon. So I had gotten pieces of that shrine and like broke it off, and I did this whole huge thing. And we did this ritual. I invoked, all these different powers, and Jake's like, "Damn, Ted, that was really impressive." And he turned what was essentially just a regular weapon into like an artifact, and then gave us permission to put it inside the Mage Forge product. And then we got the art for it, which Jake and Jeremy truly loved. So it was like super awesome. I never thought it was going to go that far. I'm like, oh, maybe a +1 or a +2 to kind of so you can get rid of the +2 great axe that you don't really care about. But it was a freaking beast of a weapon.
Yeah, and it's also just fun, right? Like now that encounter just has so much more oomph to the story, right? It's more meaningful. Like even if the
Absolutely.
encounter was kind of like lackluster, like the build up will still be memorable. You'll be
Absolutely.
memorable for it. So that's that stuff's always cool. Like in your game, we've done that a couple times where we've made things. Um, some of it turned out to be homebrew, some of it not. But anytime you get the players involved with something like that, has any of the players made any spells in your game?
Well, I mean, technically, with the untraditionally arcane, Jake made a couple of spells for Ordo Wonderbeard.
That would be a yes. Then
But I think back when you were playing, God, what was his name? Your dwarf,
Uthgar?
Uthingar. Um, I think you had made a couple of spells.
Nah, I don't think I made any spells. I just reflavored a lot of times.
Okay, I guess I'm wrong. I thought that you had made something
I
back
thought
then.
someone made a spell in one of your games too. I just couldn't remember who or what the spell was.
And then like in previous editions, we made all kinds of new spells that we
Yeah.
fussed around with. But with 5e, I feel I am not as I'm not as confident with making new spells. I've
Yeah.
altered plenty, um, you know, but as far as straight up making new spells, I've only made like one or two that we've put out there.
We've got more than new spells.
No, no,
More than a few.
I personally,
personally, okay. I was gonna
I've only
say, and
made like
all the stuff we put out, there's definitely more than that.
yes, yes, yes. I mean, like I said, Jake made like two for one of the Beardomancy products. Um, but that to me is like I would feel, you know, if I had the right theme, like I could make a class better than I feel like I would be prepared to sit and make spells. I don't know why.
Yeah,
Um,
I know your jam is magic items.
magic items and monsters are where I am confident all day long that I can make new stuff and
Do
do it pretty
you
regularly.
do you enjoy one more so than the other?
If push came to shoves, I would say, magic items, but there's a lot of joy that I get out of making both. Um,
I have to concur, but I would probably come down on the side of monsters. Just because I guess because I use so many. Whether it's just tweaking, mashing, or changing. Like I actually love taking like a lot of the NPC classes and kind of layer them over on top of existing monsters.
okay,
And I feel like you get a lot of bang for your buck there.
sure. I mean, we all need the ogre eldritch knight, right?
Yeah, of course. But isn't that just the ogre magi?
No, because the ogre magi is a lot more powerful.
Oh, uh,
That's a step up towards becoming an ogre magi.
that's the in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Um, I think the area left for us to explore, and we've threatened to do it, but we haven't really delved into it yet. But I definitely have some ideas, and that's feats.
Okay.
I think we're starting to get a little bit more of it, but I feel like feats and also magic items a little bit too. I definitely want to do something with feats and magic items that are powered by inspiration and hit
Hit dice.
dice. Like, because those resources just need to be used more.
Yeah, I feel that's a rather untapped mechanic, and I would like to do more. Our hit dice to heroics product, is a big seller and a great product, and we've talked many times about trying to expand upon that, and I would be absolutely down for coming up with some more options. Whether we approach it from a racial standpoint or just a generic standpoint. Coming up with feats that are inspired by that, I think could be pretty cool.
So I think the other area really to explore as a GM and with your players as well is when it comes to homebrew rules, right? Like you can make things in the game and homebrew and create stuff, but also you can also just make new rules or modify rules. Like we've experimented with different versions of um, critical hits. We've experimented with the critical fumbles a little bit. There's tons of people that use you can drink a potion as a bonus action. And, there's a lot of stuff like that out there that you can kind of use to make your gaming table, your gaming experience unique.
Yeah, it's really tough, and when you start gaming with a lot of different people, the amount of homebrew that can get out there can be a little tricky. By
Staggering.
raw, anytime you're taking half damage, it's round down. Well, I've seen GMs are like, no, I round up, and I'm like, okay, 1 out of my 6 tables, I got to remember this, this rounding factor.
Yeah.
Crap.
Very annoying
You
if you're a
know,
barbarian.
yeah. Um, I've had gaming groups where I have to remember 3 different critical hit rules because the GMs are doing something different at each of these tables, and it's like, all right, well, this is rather frustrating. But for a while we were using the max your first set of dice on your weapon, and it's like, all right, that's cool. Other people have seen that, liked it, and carried it forward. So it can be a lot of fun, but homebrew can be a challenging when you've got homebrew rules that are different at every table.
I don't like also too, like even with that, like that's a good example of us playing with brew stuff and seeing how different things were affected, right? Like the difference between the fighter using that role for his one attack and getting a critical and the rogue was staggering. Like probably like 80, 90 points of damage staggering, at
Yeah.
the higher levels. So you never know. Or if you happen to be a wizard or a spellcaster that casts a spell that requires an attack roll, well then you can crit. And there's a huge difference. Bless you.
Thank you.
Between that and the fighter just rolling an extra d8.
Like inflict wounds requires an attack roll. Well, when you upcast that, all right, let's 7d10 damage. I just crit. All right. Well, that's 70 plus 7 die 10.
Yeah.
Huh. Not really the way I want this to go.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and on the player side, that could be like, oh, that's annoying, right? But like, if you are applying the same rules to the players and the GM for the player, now that becomes devastating, right? Like we had, I think Ryan's character in the one game, I think he did one of the most amounts of damages ever, and it was like one attack for 111 points of damage. From a single source anyway, right?
right.
And like that hurts. Now do that to a player character, and that's brutal.
Absolutely. And depending upon the level, like that could be just insta death. So it's tough. Like, and some DMs are not ready to handle something like that. So you always have to be aware of what the possibilities are. And I know, like, Dave is, I roll it out in the open. Everybody's going to see the dice, and they're going to be what they're going to be. So
Yeah, there's definitely times that's made me nervous. Like when I see like there's been but you know what though, like it creates fun moments at the game too, because I'm like, man, I don't know if my players are gonna be able to pull this out, and they have. So have a little faith, people. Worst thing that can happen is your players will TPK.
all right, now's the tough question, Dave. Is there anything that you've homebrewed that turned out bad?
Oh man, I've been GMing for like 30 years. I would have to say yes. I can't recall specifically what, but there's probably definitely magic items in the past that I've introduced into the game. I don't know. I gave you that cloak that was kind of a mess. It was a
about
sentient magic item that allowed you to
about
essentially phase, and you're like, I want to like start my swinging my axe and phase into them and then unphase.
yeah, you allowed me to basically get, I don't know if it was like an automatic critical or increased crit range. This was a 3.5 like overpowered nonsense of a game. Um, but it was my bugbear barbarian that fought with a this big spiked mace, and it was utterly devastating. The things that I wound up doing with that thing. I remember like phasing into a dragon or something, and I crit for an obnoxious amount of damage from inside the thing. I don't remember what the name of that cloak was, but it had a lot of powers.
Yeah, that one was a bit much. And I'm sure that is not the only one. So, like I said, we've been gaming a long time, and we've made a lot of stuff. And you know what, folks? It can't all be good. And that's why you have to. That's why I'm very much like from experience saying you should really temper what you make and scale back. Because it's always easier to scale up. You know, players don't get mad when you add power to the character, but they do get a little upset when you start taking it away.
But you've got the scenario of like back then we ran games that just went on until the DM decided they wanted a break. We didn't end the story. If you're a little cautious about something, you've always got the ability to give it out towards the end of a game, towards the end of a story, if you will. And once that character retires, that's it. Problem's over, good or bad. If you're talking about, from an item perspective, uh, and like a lot of times the games that we're running now, they're like 12 to 18 sessions. So if you wait until last half, last quarter, that's anywhere from, 5 to 9 sessions. Can't get into too much damage there.
Hmm.
Heck, I was scrolling through Facebook, and I've talked many times about my kids game, and I've got some things in the works for them. And just because I've got 5 kids and an adult, I'm like, I wonder what they would do with a wish scroll.
Yeah.
And like it could absolutely be something that they just hold on to until they've got a desperate problem and somebody pulls it out. But I know there's some really really hardcore thinkers in that group that they would sit there and plot and scheme and think. I'm kind of down to see what happens. So it might just happen, and when they finally best that dragon, I think that might be something that they get.
So that is scary because I know who some of your players are. And it's not the adult I'm concerned about; it's the kids.
Yeah, I don't think they watch the channel, but it's my nephew Billy and the adult son Gabe that I think they're gonna really be we're really gonna think about what to do with that. But I honestly feel like I wouldn't just treat it like a normal magic item. I would treat it as something special. So like it would register under detect magic, and it it would glow, and it would glow with I don't even know what school of magic wish is.
It's a
Um
conjuration. I'm gonna guess conjuration.
Conjuration, that makes sense. I don't know why, but I was thinking Evo off the top of my head, but that definitely doesn't work out. Um, but then I'm like, all right, well, it's not going to be in a language that they can understand. I want to turn this into like a little bit of a like trying to figure it out is going to be a challenge.
Uh huh.
It's not going to be just a regular old scroll. And then once they figure it out, then it's going to be like, all right, now what do you do with it? Because they're low enough level that it's like, all right, being able to replicate any spell of 7th level, holy crap, that could really change a single encounter for one way or the other at any given time.
Yeah, that's not the
So
use
like,
I'd be worried about.
sure, but like beyond that, it's up to the creative whims of myself, and I'm curious to see like what would that would look like. So, and then you've got the caveat: if you don't use it for those things, that character might not ever be able to use that spell again. So,
Yeah. Well, it depends who's reading the scroll and how the scroll works too, right?
sure,
Like Ryan's sorcerer character used it um in my game, but like it's the last session and he used it in a
right,
way that could cause you to not be able to use it anymore. But like I don't think it matters at that point, right?
right, right,
Like the character's not going to see any play, so
right. You know, but it's still something, and I feel that not only is it something that as a DM I'm curious to be tested. I want to be challenged. I'm curious to see like what kind of things that they come up with. So that's another homebrew option is to like bend and twist the rules of something that already exists. So Wish exists, Magic Scrolls exist, but I don't think it would be a common thing or even a legendary thing for just a scroll of wish to exist. So it would be another type, an elevation above a regular scroll, something that identify is not going to function. Um, because that's another thing. Like I love the earlier level spell or earlier edition spells of analyzed Weomer. That's really where you can learn what all the properties of something are. Identify in earlier editions told you one thing about an item,
yeah.
and now it's cakewalk. Like, oh yeah, first level wizard can you know instantly know everything about an item without being susceptible to any of the drawbacks.
Yeah,
Like, well, that sucks.
I'm pretty sure you can just handle it during a short rest and know everything too.
Yeah, which I'm not fond of that either.
Yeah. It does take away some of the mystery.
It takes away a layer of fun of the game. Yeah, there's a frustration at times of like, oh man, we don't know whether this is dangerous or not. Um, I'm trying to play catch up on Critical Role, so little bit of spoilers for someone who's a month or two behind. Um, but like, Travis gets a magic sword, and it's now the third in a line of three where he's got a sentient weapon,
Oh.
and he is ecstatic and like instantly he's like, nah, you don't need to identify this. Like he's like, I'm gonna put this in my bag of holding. So I'm like, I love that play style where it's like, no, you don't need to be told everything. You can figure things out. It's sometimes more fun that way.
Uh, yeah. So, do you have any homebrew you're working on now that you can share with us?
So I don't have anything specific, though. For the newsletter, I might re-put together my displacer troll.
Okay.
I think that could be a lot of fun. The only thing I have in the works is my kids game where I have to come up with the Sword of Vandus, but it's a long ways out from being done
Yeah.
because as I kind of teased on a chat a while ago, they're gonna go fight a dragon, which was probably supposed to happen this summer, but we played like 2 or 3 sessions of a different game. I got to be a player instead, so we're kind of behind where I thought we would be. Um, Vandus is our god of combat and skill, so it's more of a skill at arms, if you will, as opposed to I want to slaughter everything. But they're only the hilt and crossguard of the sword is going to be found. So he's got to then go find the blade and get it re-put together in some way, shape, or form before it actually becomes a thing.
Well,
So,
for your castle game, I think you homebrewed a lot of stuff.
oh, I homebrewed a really fun encounter for the finale. Um, I had them kind of fighting a shadowy dragon that couldn't really be killed. They had to actually um like drive the spirit back into the body of the dragon that had been corrupted. So I felt that was a lot of fun to play around with, of like essentially an unkillable thing. Uh, and they bit onto the information and did not miss a beat. It's like, all right, we're gonna fight the paladin or the anti-paladin, and the spellcasters are gonna stay back there and you know you know do the skill challenge.
But didn't you like homebrew the drakes that they rode?
Yes, and I had done that all up in a previous newsletter so that everybody could see how I had done that up. So everybody got every player character got access to a feat at first level. Their riding Drake got the exact same feat. They had a telepathic connection to their Drake. Sorry, an empathic connection. They knew, like, if they left the Drakes and went off and did something, they could know whether their Drake was like uneasy or frightened or damaged or any of these kind of things. Um, and then anytime they gained a level, the Drake got a new hit die, as well as they had the ability to customize it with a variety of different, you know, you know, whether you want to call it a power up or what have you. Did you want it to have a breath weapon? Did you want it to have, a skill set? Did you want it to, be, more magically capable? There were a whole handful of options that I had come up with.
So yeah, and like all of those can be cool ways to introduce homebrew into your game. Like in that instance, like you designed a whole campaign around that specific element of homebrew, right? And like it can be a catalyst to doing something in your game that's different than maybe what your players are used to. Like I don't know if it's not really homebrew, but like in the Under the Dome game, you guys all got to start off with Devil's Rides um, that are just modified slightly to work a little bit different than they do in the Sentence or Avernus. But like you know, adding something like that to your game can greatly change the dynamic of the campaign and give your players a completely different kind of experience.
It's a different experience, a different feel of the game. Like, if you've got the ability to be like, all right, we're gonna go get on our motorcycles and ride on out into into the wilds, like that's not a typical D&D ism, you know. So it gave us a different aspect of how this game was going to be run. It gives us
It
a
also
little bit
spawned
more.
me having to create homebrew rules for different scenarios.
Yeah, yeah, and different types of encounters,
Yeah.
and you know, having a motorcycle race is something that is was a lot of fun. Having the ability to travel further away from town, because as instead of walking, like, we can just get on our rides that go really fast.
Yeah.
But that also means that, oh well, if something happens at breakneck speeds, your character's getting seriously hurt, if not dead. So
That's all part of the fun.
that's
And
all part and parcel of the game.
we've been having so much fun talking about homebrew. We forgot to mention the fact that episode is sponsored by Easy Roller Dice, and there is a coupon code in the description below. On your first order, you can get a whopping 25% off. So go click that link, use that promo code, and get yourself some Easy Roller Dice. We are at the 9 o'clock hour. Do you have any announcements?
No announcements other than the fact that Easy Roller Dice keeps popping out awesome new dice. I don't have the name of it off the top of my head, but I saw on their Facebook page this awesome green and black dice set that I'm gonna have to get a copy of for myself because they're just freaking badass. So if you haven't been to the site in a while, go check it out and go check out some of the new dice. Um, this Friday we'll be back with another episode of Old Guard. So if you're into that game, you want to watch some old adventures and their antics, come on back for some fun times.
And that's Robin is the GM, right?
Correct.
Robin is a fantastic, amazing game master. So you're going to want to check that out. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.